The last Saturday in October, the Napa Valley harvest was 3 weeks done, and the Callaway Ridge Winery was hosting its annual estate dinner under the oak canopy beside the barrel room. Tanner Voss had been repairing the old stone retaining wall along the east vineyard since 6 that morning, work boots caked with red clay, collar damp from the afternoon sun. A woman's voice carried through the vines, something about the Bordeaux blend being the finest she had tasted in years. Then she was walking the path back toward the barrel room, and she stopped when she saw him. He said it before he could think about whether to. "You belong in there, not out here checking walls." Celeste Callaway looked at him. The lantern light from the dinner tent caught the edge of her face. She said it almost too quietly to hear. "I would rather be out here. If that pulled you in, drop the word stay in the comments before we go on." 6 in the morning. Fog sat in the low vineyard rows, the way it does in the valley in late October, thick enough to lose a person 10 feet out. Tanner was already at the stone wall with a cold coffee and a level. The mortar on the lower courses had been failing for 2 seasons. He had told the estate manager in March. They had called him in October. He set his coffee on a post and went back to work. A man named Holt came out of the winery at 7. He was the assistant vintner, and he had the habit of offering observations he had not been asked for. "Nice morning for it," he said. Tanner said nothing. Holt watched him work for 30 seconds and went back inside. By 8, Tanner was home. His house sat at the end of a gravel road in Yountville, a rental with a covered porch that faced east. The kitchen smelled of maple syrup and the dust that came in under the door from the gravel. His son Eli sat at the table in his school clothes, reading a book about volcanoes with his chin in his hand. "You were up early," Eli said. "Big wall." He accepted that. He turned the page. The volcano on the cover was mid-eruption, orange and enormous. Tanner made 2 plates and set one in front of Eli and sat down across from him. Eli did not look up from the book. He read the way some kids eat, completely absorbed, the rest of the world reduced to background noise. At 8:10, Tanner dropped Eli at school and drove back through town. The valley was gold and red in the morning, the kind of morning that makes people from other places understand why people who live here never leave. On the 14th floor of Callaway Group's San Francisco office, Celeste stood at the glass wall with a coffee that had gone cold. The bay below was flat and gray and enormous. Her chief of operations, a careful man named Dressler, knocked twice and entered. "The Margot Group moved their offer up," he said. "They want an answer by the 15th. She nodded. "Celeste." He waited. She did not turn. He set the folder on the edge of her desk and left. She did not look at the folder. She looked at the photograph on the credenza. Her father at the harvest table 10 years ago, the year the estate won its first double gold. Her own younger self beside him, holding a glass she was not supposed to have yet, laughing at something off camera. At noon, she drove down to the valley. No appointment, no assistant. She parked outside the east vineyard and walked the path to where Tanner was working. He heard her on the gravel before he saw her. He stood. "The upper courses will need to be relaid," she said, "not just repointed." He had known that since March. He said nothing. "How long will it take?" 3 weeks if the weather holds. 4 if it doesn't. She nodded. She did not move. "Is there anything else, Miss Callaway?" She looked at the wall, then at him. The vineyard around them, the birds, the distant sound of a tractor in the lower rows did not pause. "No," she said, "that is fine." She turned to go. He let her get 5 steps before he said it. "I should not have said what I said last night." She stopped but did not turn around. "You think I would have come down the path at all if you had not?" She kept walking. He stood with the trowel in his hand for a long time after the sound of her footsteps on the gravel had faded. Then he sat down on the low course of the wall and set his hands on his knees and looked out at the vines. He was not hurt. He could not understand why he was not hurt. That seemed like information worth sitting with. At the end of the day, he drove to the park at the edge of town and sat on the tailgate of his truck while Eli played on the climbing structure with 2 other kids from his class. A man named Walter came and stood beside him with a thermos of coffee and poured a second cup without asking and handed it over. "You said the thing," Walter said. "I said the thing. Was it wrong?" Tanner watched Eli scale the top of the structure and stand there surveying the park below like a small general. He said, "I don't know yet what it was." They drank coffee until the lights started to go, and Eli came running with his jacket in his hand instead of on his body, as always, and his sneakers untied as always, and Tanner caught him by the shoulder and said, "Jacket," and Eli said it wasn't even cold and put it on anyway. The next morning, Celeste stayed in her office past the time she usually left for the valley. She had a stack of tasting notes on the desk, and she read none of them. She got up and walked to the photograph and took it down from the credenza and held it for a moment, not looking at it. Then she set it flat on the desk. Her father had signed off on the East Vineyard wall renovation in the spring of the year he died. He had sent the request to the estate manager with a note that said, "Get the man who did the Bergman retaining project. He knows what Old Stone wants." She had found the note in his files 8 months ago. She had not known what to do with it then. Dressler knocked and entered with the morning schedule. He glanced at the photograph on the desk. He glanced at her. "The mason at the estate," he said, as if it had just come to him. I looked into his background. He had a practice in Portland for 7 years. High-end residential and commercial, some significant projects. She did not look up. "What brought him to the valley?" Dressler did not want to say more than that. He said personal reasons, as far as I can tell. He thanked her for her time and left. She sat with her hand flat on the photograph until the morning light moved across the desk and reached her fingers. By 11 she was at the estate. She walked past the wall without looking at it and found Tanner in the barrel room rechecking the temperature logs. The room smelled of oak and something older than oak. She did not wait for him to finish. "You had a practice in Portland." He set the clipboard down on the barrel rack. He said it without looking at her. "I had a practice. You left it." Yes, the barrel room was cool and dim. Outside, a mockingbird was working through its full repertoire. "My father's note said you were the only person he trusted with the Old Stone." Tanner was quiet. "He said the same thing to me about every person he trusted. He never told them he'd said it." She almost smiled. "That sounds right." She sat down on the edge of an old wine crate, the way someone does when they have been standing for longer than they knew. She did not look fragile doing it. She looked like someone choosing to take up less space for a moment. "You were going to stay in Portland," he said. "My wife was sick. We had been in the valley before, years earlier, when I was working for a firm out of St. Helena. It was where she wanted to be. So we came back. She lived 14 months. After a while, she said, and then I went back to the office the week after the funeral. I sat down at my drafting table and picked up a pencil and knew that if I drew the first line I would hate it, so I did not draw it. I have not drawn one since." Celeste was very still. "How long ago?" 3 years. She stood. She did not say she was sorry. She did not ask him anything else. She walked to the barrel room door and stopped with her hand on the frame. "Your father's note was not just about the stone," she said. He understood what she meant. He did not say so. She left. Tanner stood in the cool dark of the barrel room for a long time. 2 floors up in the estate house, a man named Whitmore opened the bottom drawer of the desk in the study and took out a sealed envelope with the Callaway Group letterhead. He looked at it. He put it back. He picked up his phone. "We need to move faster," he said. "She's spending more time at the property." Tanner came home that evening and Eli was at the kitchen table with a piece of graph paper, drawing a map of a place that did not exist. It had mountains and a river and a city labeled only the capital. "Is that from the volcano book?" Tanner asked. "No," Eli said. "This is a different place. I made it up." Tanner stood at the counter and looked at the map. The city had a wall around it, heavy lines cross-hatched to show depth, the way someone draws a wall when they want it to hold. "Dad." "Yeah, the lady from the winery. Is she your boss?" Tanner got 2 glasses from the cabinet and poured water in both. "Not exactly," he said. Eli looked at the map. "Does she know what she is then?" Tanner set a glass in front of him and sat down. "She knows what she is," he said. Eli nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to drawing the Capitol's wall. 3 days later, Celeste sent a message through the estate manager. The stone on the South Terrace stairs needed evaluation. Could he look at it when he had time? He went that afternoon. The stairs did not need evaluation. The stone was fine. He stood on the South Terrace for a moment in the late afternoon light and looked at the valley and understood that some requests are not about what they say they are about. He went back the following morning and repointed 2 courses on the east wall that did not strictly need it yet, working slowly in no hurry. At noon, she came out with 2 coffees in plain mugs, not the ceramic branded ones the estate used for guests. She handed him one and sat down on the low stone bench nearby. They did not talk about the business. They talked about the valley. She told him about the summer she was 12, and her father let her punch down the cap on the fermentation tank for the first time, and she had gone at it too hard and soaked herself to the elbows. Tanner told her about the winter in Portland when Eli was 4. and they had a pipe burst in the kitchen ceiling on Christmas morning, and spent the holiday eating takeout on the floor with towels everywhere, and Eli had declared it the best Christmas because they ate on the floor. She laughed at that. It was a real laugh, not a public one. He noticed the difference. That evening, Whitmore arrived at the estate house with 2 colleagues from the Margot Group. He had not told Celeste he was coming. He had used his access as legal advisor to the board to schedule a walkthrough of the property with the prospective buyers. The estate manager called Celeste at 6. She was already in her car in 40 minutes. She arrived to find Whitmore on the south terrace with 2 men in good coats pointing at things. She walked past them and through the estate house and into the back office, and pulled the board charter from the shelf and opened it to the section on property access. She read it standing. She came back out. "Whitmore," she said. He turned with the particular smile of a man who is prepared for this. "Celeste." The board approved a preliminary assessment. She looked at the 2 men from Margot. She looked at Whitmore. The valley below the terrace was going purple in the last light. "Get off my family's land," she said. It was very quiet on the terrace. They left. She stood on the south terrace alone after they had gone, her hands at her sides, and looked out at the vineyard. The vines were bare now, post-harvest, the rows clean and dark against the red soil. Tanner had parked his truck at the bottom of the east path. He was still working. The shape of him was small against the wall in the fading light. She did not go down. She went inside. That night, Celeste's family attorney forwarded an email. It was from her father's estate files, sent 4 months after his death by Whitmore to outside counsel. It read, "Hold the Voss Foundation notification until I give the word. The word may not come." She read it twice. She forwarded it with a single line, "File tomorrow morning." The next day, Tanner arrived at the east wall to find a note tucked under his toolbox. It was from the estate manager. A reporter from a Bay Area publication had filed a request for comment about the CEO of Callaway Group and an unnamed employee at the Napa estate. The estate manager had not responded. He was letting Tanner know. Tanner stood with the note for a moment. He folded it. He put it in his jacket pocket. He went back to the wall. At noon, Celeste called him. "I expect you've heard." He said he had. "If you want to step away from the project, I will settle the contract in full." There was a pause long enough to hear the wind off the vineyard in the background on his end. "No," he said. She closed her eyes. She held the phone against her ear and listened to him breathe and did not say anything for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She hung up. At his desk in the city, Whitmore read the article on his laptop and permitted himself a small, careful satisfaction. He was confident in his position. He had been managing the Callaway estate's external affairs for 11 years. He knew where the filings were. He knew what had never been filed. What he did not know was what was in the old safe in the Yountville storage unit that Walter Drummond had been holding for 2 years. 4 days later, Walter called Tanner. "Come by the shop," he said. "I've been sitting on something long enough." The shop was a furniture restoration business. Walter ran out of a converted barn on the west side of town. When Tanner arrived, Walter was already at the back table with a manila envelope and 2 mugs of coffee. He had the look of a man setting down something heavy. "Edmund Callaway gave me this 14 months before he died," Walter said. "He told me to hold it until his daughter was ready to look at it without flinching. I've waited 2 years. I'm done waiting." Celeste arrived 20 minutes after Tanner called her. She drove herself. She came in and sat down at the back table without greeting either of them and opened the envelope. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a trust instrument dated 8 years back. It assigned a 7% voting interest in the Callaway Group to a named beneficiary for a period of 15 years. The beneficiary was Tanner Voss. She read the name twice. The second was a letter in her father's handwriting. 3 pages, legal pad, the kind of writing he did when he was thinking something through rather than performing it. He had written that he had known the board would move toward a sale after he was gone. He had written that he had chosen Voss because in 2017, Voss had walked off a significant commercial contract when the developer had asked him to cut corners on the foundation stone of a historic building, had walked away from the fee, had not explained himself to anyone. He had written that he needed his daughter to have someone beside her who would not trade integrity for ease, and that he could think of no one else he trusted in that way. He had written that he had not told her because he did not want her to inherit a directive. He wanted her to arrive at her own understanding of who Tanner Voss was. He had written that if she was reading this, Walter had decided she was ready. And Walter had never been wrong about anyone Edmund knew. She folded the letter, she put both documents back in the envelope. She looked at Tanner. Whitmore knew. He was the estate's legal advisor at the time of filing. He had access to the trust registry. He was the one designated to notify the beneficiary.
He never notified you,
She said. No, she picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. She left the shop with the envelope and drove east through the valley and up into the hills above the Silver Atrauto Trail to a small cemetery overlook where her father's family had a plot. Going back 3 generations, she parked and walked up through the dry grass to the flat stone at the edge of the ridge. She sat down beside it. She did not say much. She said, "You should have told me yourself." She said, "I understand why you didn't." The wind moved in the dry grass. A red-tailed hawk worked the thermals above the ridge. She sat for a long time. She did not hear Tanner's truck on the gravel until he was already walking up the path. He did not look surprised to find her there. She did not look surprised to see him. "You come here," she said. He sat down on the grass a few feet from the stone. He said, "I came once in the summer to thank him." I wasn't sure I believed he'd hear it. She looked at the valley below. The afternoon light was long across the vineyard rows. The whole valley looked like it was made of gold and patience. "He didn't tell you because he knew you'd resist anything that looked like an instruction," Tanner said. "He needed you to get there yourself, I know." She wasn't angry at that. She had been in the car briefly, but sitting on this ridge with the hawk above and the valley below, she understood it the way she understood most things her father had done, which was from the inside out long after the fact. "You knew him a different way than I did," she said. He nodded. "You knew a version of him I'll never know. I knew one he didn't show his family." They sat quietly. After a while, he said, "I'm going to take the trust voting." She turned to look at him. "For Edmund, for the 140 people on this property. Because you shouldn't have to do this alone." He paused. "Not just for you, but for you too." She looked at the stone. She nodded once. When the light started to go, they stood. They walked back down the path to the gravel lot without speaking. They drove back to the valley in separate cars. At the bottom of the hill, she raised a hand from the window as she pulled ahead. He raised his. That evening, Tanner sat on the edge of Eli's bed for a long time after the boy had gone to sleep. The room was dark except for the strip of light under the door. The window was cracked and the night air smelled of dry grass and the last of the grapes. He had not talked to his wife in his head for nearly 2 years. It had been something he could not do anymore after the first year. He found himself doing it now, quietly, not out loud. He said, "I think I'm going to draw something again." And then he said, "I think it might be all right now." He sat there, another half hour, then he went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table with the old sketchbook he had not opened. He did not open it tonight, he just put his hand on the cover. Tomorrow, maybe, or the day after, the book would still be there. He was at the estate by 7. The board meeting was held in the estate house on a Friday. 10 shareholders gathered around the long dining table, the valley visible through the east windows. Whitmore chaired. He presented the Margot's offer, $12.4 million for controlling interest and full brand licensing rights. The numbers were organized to be persuasive. He included, near the end, a reference to recent media speculation regarding the CEO's professional judgment in light of personal associations at the property. He paused on that reference. Celeste stood. She was not hurried about it. She walked to the head of the table and set 3 documents in front of the shareholders. She read her father's trust instrument aloud. She read his letter aloud. Her voice was even throughout. Then she placed the 3rd document on the table. It was Whitmore's email to outside counsel, the one that had sat in her father's estate files for 2 years, instructing them to hold notification of the trust beneficiary indefinitely. An older shareholder named Britton, who had known Edmund Calloway since before Celeste was born, looked down at the table. Then he looked at Whitmore. Then he looked back at the table. "Whitmore," he said, "tell me this isn't what it looks like." Whitmore did not say anything. Tanner stood up from the far end of the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not start with the injury. He laid out what he and Celeste had built over the preceding week, the estate on its own terms. The tasting room expansion projected over 4 years, the restoration program for the historic vineyard infrastructure, 140 jobs preserved, 11 new positions over 3 years, a premium tier label under the Calloway family name, produced from the oldest blocks, revenue projections that did not require selling anything. He spoke for 8 minutes. He spoke about stone and old vines and the specific kind of value that cannot be replicated once it is sold away. Because you cannot buy back what you have decided does not matter. He said at the end, Edmund Calloway trusted me not to let this go for a number. I'm not going to let it go for a number. His daughter should not have to be standing here alone. That's all I have. He sat down. The vote went by ownership share. Celeste's 33%, Tanner's 7% from the trust, Britain's 11%. 4 additional shareholders came with them. The total against the Margot's offer came to 64%. The motion failed. Britain made the second motion. He proposed the immediate removal of Whitmore as board legal advisor pending investigation by the estate's independent counsel for breach of fiduciary duty. The vote on that was unanimous, with one abstention, which was Whitmore. Whitmore gathered his papers. He did not look at anyone. He walked to the front door and down the stone steps and across the gravel to his car. He had managed the legal affairs of this estate for 11 years. He had been certain of his position. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the car. The certainty had somewhere gone. He could not find where he had left it. Inside the estate house, the room cleared slowly. Britain came to Celeste and put a hand briefly on her arm and said, "He would have been proud of you today." She said, "Thank you." He nodded and left. When the room was empty, Celeste and Tanner were left at the long table. The valley through the east windows was full of afternoon light. The vines below cast long shadows across the red soil. She said, "We should go outside." He stood. Yes. They walked out through the kitchen and onto the south terrace. That evening, Tanner made dinner at the house in Yountville. Celeste brought a bottle from the estate, a Cabernet she had been setting aside since the year her father died. She said she had been waiting for a reason that felt equal to it. Eli ate 2 helpings of everything and mostly talked about the volcano book, which he had finished and then immediately started again from the beginning. He reported that Kilauea had been erupting more or less continuously for decades. He found this extremely reasonable. Celeste said she had stood at the edge of a lava field in Hawaii once when she was 11. Her father had taken her. She said the ground under her feet had been thin in places, and she could hear the heat inside it. Eli looked at her with the focused attention he reserved for information he considered truly significant. "Could you actually hear it?" he said. She said yes. He picked up his fork and resumed eating, satisfied. After dinner, Eli took himself off to his room without being asked. Tanner noticed. He stood in the kitchen doorway watching the hall for a moment. "That's new," Celeste said. "Tonight is actually the first time." She picked up a dish towel. He handed her a glass to dry, and she dried it without comment, which felt, for reasons he couldn't have fully explained, like a very natural thing. They went out to the back porch when the kitchen was done. The night was cool and clear. The gravel road beyond the yard was pale in the dark. Stars were out in the unobstructed way. They come out in the valley when the fog has not moved in. They stood at the railing for a long time without speaking. "The night of the estate dinner," she said. "I didn't plan to say what I said, neither did I." He looked at the gravel road. "I had been thinking it since June. Every time I came to the property and you happened to be there, I never said it once. Why not? Didn't think it was mine to say." She looked at him then. "It was always yours to say." The porch light was low. Her face was half in shadow. He said, "What happens now?" She didn't answer immediately. She let the question sit between them for a moment, the way she had learned from her father to let things sit before she answered them. Then she reached over and took his hand. Not the fingertips, the whole hand. He held hers. Neither of them said anything more. They stood on the back porch of a rented house in Yountville and held hands and watched the dark gravel road and the stars in the edge of the vineyard 2 properties over, and did not need anything else to happen that night. After a while she said, "I should go." He said, "All right." She walked down the porch steps. She did not look back. She lifted a hand without turning at the bottom before she crossed to her car. He stood at the screen door until her tail lights went out past the bend, and the sound of the car had dissolved into the quiet of the road. The kitchen light was still on behind him. He turned it off. He stood in the dark for a moment with his hand on the switch. He could hear Eli breathing in the back bedroom. He could hear the night settling. He had not known 3 years ago that there was a life on the other side of the one he had been surviving. He had not let himself look for one. Tonight, without deciding to, he found he could see it. He went to bed. 6 weeks later, on a clear Saturday in mid-December, the valley cold now, the oaks bare, a low white sky holding the light longer than it should. Whitmore had resigned from the board 4 weeks earlier. The independent investigation was underway. The Margot offer had been formally withdrawn. Britton had been named interim chair. On that Saturday, Tanner opened the sketchbook. He sat at the kitchen's table after Eli left for his friend's house, and he opened the cover and took out a pencil and held it for a moment. He had not held a pencil for drawing in 3 years. He drew a line. It was the corner of a stone wall. Just the corner where 2 courses met at an angle. He studied it. He drew another line beneath it, the slight outward lean of old stone that has settled over decades into itself. He did not hate it. He sat at the table for 2 hours and drew the East Vineyard wall from memory, the whole length of it, every point of failure and every course that it held, the old stones and the newer ones, the places where someone long ago had known what they were doing, and the places where they had not. He drew it the way it was, and also the way it should have been. He drew until Eli came home and stood in the kitchen door with his coat still on, looking at the sketchbook. "Whoa," Eli said. Tanner looked at what he had drawn. "Whoa," he agreed. Eli sat down. "Can I have a page?" Tanner tore one out and slid it across the table with a pencil. Eli drew the Capitol again, the city with the wall around it. This time the wall was taller and more detailed. It had a gate with an arch. He labeled the arch. He labeled it Voss Gate. Tanner looked at it for a long time. The following Saturday, Celeste came to Yountville. She drove herself. No assistant, no agenda. She arrived at the house in the early afternoon with a Dutch oven full of soup she had made that morning. She said her housekeeper had taught her the recipe, and she had not made it successfully 3 times in a row yet, so outcomes were uncertain. It was excellent. After lunch, Eli showed her the map of the capital. She studied it the way she studied anything that mattered, which was with her full attention and no performance of it. "Is the wall historically accurate?" she said. Eli considered. "Not yet," he said. "I'm still researching." She nodded seriously. "Good approach." She and Tanner took a walk later, down the gravel road and through the neighbor's trailhead and up into the dry hills west of town. Eli came for the first quarter mile and then ran ahead to look at something and did not come back. They walked slowly through the oaks and the dry grass. She told him the design division would be reopening in February, a restoration practice under the Callaway estate name, stone and wood and old structures done properly. She had already filed the paperwork. She wanted him to lead it. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Part-time, enough to be home for school pickup." She said, "Of course," he said, "and I keep the wall until it's done." She said, "Obviously." They walked until they could see the valley from the ridge, the rows of bare vines below, the silver thread of the creek, the estate house small and white at the center of it all. Eli was far ahead, his orange jacket bright against the dry grass. Celeste said, "My father used to bring me up here." "I know," Tanner said. "He mentioned it." She looked at him. He said it was the place he came to when he needed to know what mattered. He said he always knew the answer before he got to the top. She looked out at the valley. "Did you?" He had been holding that for 2 years, not sure whether she would want it. He said yes. They stood there for a while, not saying much. The valley below was still and enormous, and the light was very clear. Eli turned at the ridgeline and came running back toward them at full speed, as if suddenly remembering they existed. "Dad," he called from 20 yards out, his orange jacket coming fast down the dry hill. "There's a hawk up here. It was right there. I almost touched it." He reached them, breathless, delighted, his jacket half off one shoulder. Tanner zipped the jacket. "You did not almost touch a hawk," he said. "I almost saw it very close," Eli said. "Celeste," he said, turning to her with the focused earnestness of a 7-year-old delivering important news. "There was a hawk." "I believe you," she said. He nodded once, satisfied, and ran ahead again. They walked back down to the road as the afternoon light went lower and the valley turned that specific shade of November gold that lasts about 20 minutes and then is gone. Eli ran the last 100 yards to the house and stood on the porch waiting for them, his breath visible in the cold air. Tanner watched him standing there. He thought of the wall at the edge of the East Vineyard, the old stone that had been failing in the same courses for 2 seasons. He thought of the first line he had drawn on Saturday morning, the corner of it, the slight lean of the settle. He thought of the 3 years he had spent not drawing anything, and the morning he had finally picked up the pencil and found that what was on the other side of the silence was not loss. It was just the next line. Eli jumped off the porch railing and jogged toward them. Celeste caught him by the shoulder as he went past gently, and he slowed without being told to and fell into step beside them. The 3 of them walked the last 30 yards to the front door together. She had not planned for any of this, neither had he. The porch light came on as they reached the steps, triggered by the motion sensor, flooding the front of the house with warm light. Eli went straight up and inside for the soup. Tanner held the door open. Celeste went up the steps and through the door. She stopped just inside and looked back at him. The light was behind her. Her face was calm. She had been waiting for something without knowing what it was. She thought maybe this had been it all along, not an answer. Just a door held open by someone who meant it. She went inside. He followed. The door closed behind them. The porch light held for another 30 seconds and then went dark. The gravel road was quiet. The valley below the hills was full of its own silence, the particular silence of old land that has held many things and does not speak of them unless you know where to stand and how to listen. And the vines were bare now, and the soil was red, and 6 weeks from now the first green of the new season would begin to move through the old wood of the oldest blocks, the way it had every spring for 80 years, unhurried and certain, as if it had never considered the possibility of not returning.